Hello, this is the voice of Stuart Pearce, and welcome to Deep Dialogues, a series of vital conversations that I have with global soul stewards from all over the world who provide us with an understanding of how we can create a new hierarchy of values that is absolutely significant at this unique time of becoming. I hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening. Daniel!
Hello.
Bless you, my brother, bless you. And to all of you thousands of people that are tuning in, Robin, you've just left the most beautiful message. One of my wonderful people who is so constant in her vigilance of all the work that I do, and particularly these deep dialogues, is saying, blessings to Stuart, Daniel, and Ryan, and everyone looking forward to this deep dialogue. Hey, warrior girl, the wonderful people tuning in from all over the world. So let's get started. As usual, everybody, I'm going to provide you with an official introduction to this extraordinary bearded gentleman in front of me. I once knew him without the beard many years ago when he sat in front of me when he first arrived from the United States of America to the United Kingdom. And then suddenly, just watching your career over the last 20 years has just been like watching a meteor scoring through the skies with a trail of extraordinary plasma. It's been just extraordinary. Anyway, touch into that in a moment. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have in front of you, hello, Sarah. We have Daniel KRAMER. Daniel is a unique theatre and opera director who was until quite recently the artistic director of English National Opera, an appointment he served for 3 years. Daniel brings immense genius to his work as an innovative, imaginative, and poetic director that always delves into the realms of the human soul and the way that the spirit of life moves through his work and all of his performances. Daniel has directed in the principal theatre and opera houses around the world, so numerous. I wasn't even going to attempt the enumerability of all of the places that he's worked. However, there have been notable successes, and it has led him to receive the South Bank Award for the most outstanding achievement in opera through ENO, the Golden Mask Awards for his Bluebeard's Castle at ENO, the Mariinsky, and the Bolshoi theaters, obviously in Russia. And Daniel teaches in major conservatoires throughout the world, including Harvard, and is a fellow of the New York City Drama League. Daniel KRAMER, what a joy.
Hi. Thanks.
I mean, who would have known 20 years ago that we would be sitting here having a deep dialogue and looking at the scoring success of your trajectory? It's just been amazing.
Well, that's very kind. I mean, I did think I definitely knew when I met you that I would know you for the rest of our shared time. I really do think I knew that. And yes, who would have known how the career would have climbed and fallen and climbed and fallen and found joy. And it's, I can't believe it's been 20 years either, and what has happened and what's ahead, and also everything I've learned in life. I've had a beautiful life around the globe, seeing the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, heartfelt welcome to you. And of course, you've given us a very, very interesting title as the possibility of what our journey may be on this deep dialogue. Lay Adam to rest. Please illustrate.
Well, it's almost lazy of me, or selfish, I should say, because I'm writing a couple librettos right now, and this first one for a wonderful Australian composer, Luke Stiles, has somehow, it was not our intention, but we woke up after reading a few of my favorite books on earth, and what can we discuss as two white men? What is happening to the earth? What is happening politically around us? And if we look at not 3-year patterns, but 300, 3,000-year patterns, and we've been digging into the familial life of Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, Azura, Aklaima, the family. And so much of my work over the past, I would say 7 years, since I did actually have an engagement with a shaman and a really big fall in my own life, learning to get back up and walk again, I really have tried to view art as an act of service. Somehow, for me, always relating to archetypes. I'm obsessed with Jung. I'm obsessed with Bettelheim, with France, with Mary Midgley philosophy, esoteric philosophy. And there just seems like a huge moment right now to look at the patterns, the patriarchal patterns. We talk about these words. I know these words for some people are just an absolute trigger, but to look at the patterns that Adam is carrying to the grave with him and that need to change, as we see all around us. Systemic racism being probably the largest one, the abuse of the globe, probably the second largest one. The globe will survive, of course. We will not. And so I'm very interested as a male right now, as a white male, even though I am queer, I'm very interested in taking responsibility, and trying to help the audiences that I can talk to is something we're learning about with authority, that I can talk about the dangers of privilege and entitlement and blind spots. So it's just my effort right now to keep being an active part of the conversation of global art. And again, I really want to acknowledge hearing the cries of Black Lives Matter, systemic racism in educational higher institutions. You'll see the interview with the Prince and Meghan tonight, systemic racism in all institutions, but also in the arts. And whose stories are we telling, and whose stories do we have the power to tell best? And diversifying the arts across the world, which remains a huge challenge. So Adam, to rest. Yeah. Age Aquarius.
It's a beautiful thesis, a really beautiful thesis. And what's remarkable for us, bearing in mind the nature of how you and I meet under the auspices of the soul of the artist. Just to give you context, I think this is the 33rd deep dialogue that I've entered into, which was a project that really came about by natural emission, by natural creative emission in April of last year because of COVID. I was being connected with so many remarkable people like yourself all over the planet that I hadn't spoken to for some time, or indeed new people that came through saying, I've always wanted to have a conversation with you. And the quality of conversation that we were having in the initial global pause through April, May, and June was so ravishing that we were going to these deep dive, substantive, archetypal, symbolic Jungian frames, and delving into the collective unconscious, that I thought, wow, this is my next level of service, that I really want to allow the premise of if words arise from the heart, they enter the heart. If words arise from the tongue alone, they don't pass beyond the ears, to quote And here we are diving in, and it seems that you've been extraordinarily busy, as we've just heard, over the last 15-20 years in establishing yourself as a major innovation within the process of neo-paradigm, innovative, poetic theatre or opera. And I feel film is calling you. And yet what's wonderful for us as an inspiration is that as soon as all of that work was seized by COVID, because performances are not taking place, you dove into your inner spirit to discover, what do I need to rummage around inside here to find out what is the next level of creative percolation. And here you are talking about it. And of course, you've gone right into the very quick, haven't you? You've gone right into the very soul of what needs to take place in terms of bringing the divine feminine and the divine masculine into balance.
I mean,
I
just want to shout out there too, and like in the middle of it all, I've dropped Lilith back in place, right in the center as the androgy, as the original creator from blackness, the original womb that was equal. Yeah, well, I just sorry, I interrupted, but I have to say, you're a tonic. I need to keep you in my left ear on a daily basis when the saboteurs come in, and all I do is look at the glasses half empty. But I keep working. I do keep working every day.
I'm reminded suddenly of images of Romeo and Juliet.
At the Globe
No, actually,
in Lebanon, and it's St. George's.
at St. George's, Tufnell Park, which, for those of you who don't know, was a church that was made into a theatre probably about 35, 40 years ago. So it was deconsecrated, made an extraordinary performance space. And when Daniel first arrived in the United Kingdom, he sought me out and we started working together. And I sort of assisted him as best I could on this first production, which was absolutely extraordinary but you were entering into the whole substance then of the balance, the true balance of these two beautiful lovers, the divine male, divine feminine, coexisting, co-creating in this immensely violent society, which is really, I suppose, the essential antithesis of the story, isn't it? So then you were also exhuming the fact that Lilith needed to reappear and Adam need to be laid to rest. So I can't wait to read what you're writing, or indeed, the next piece that you're investigating with the gentleman you just referred to.
Well, I will be excited to share it. I'm very hopeful. It's one of those beautiful things where it's like opening a door to a group of friends and archetypes and getting to listen to them and understand what they want to say, what needs to be said. So it's a real joy. It's a real like manna every day. It's such nourishment.
This is beautiful because also it gives us perspective, because many of the dear ones who are listening in, watching, because obviously this video will be there for posterity, for perpetuity, can look into your wise words about the fact that the intelligent artist, who is essentially an imagist and a sensualist, is constantly opening up the conversation, even during times of non-performance. And I know you have a fatal decree for yourself that when you've worked through those 4, 5, 6 weeks, or however long the rehearsal process takes place, you open the piece and then you disappear, because you literally hand over the vehicle to your performers. I'm remembering things that you've said to me quite recently.
Oh, yes.
But for those of us who are, that are unfamiliar with the performer's spirit, because we're always seeing you're backstage, we know, but often appearing on stage with your actors, with your singers, with your opera singers. And by the way, for those of you who remember Corinne, Daniel introduced me to Corinne Winters. Remember the beautiful opera singer that came on? Because everybody loved Corinne. She was so beautiful and so beautifully intelligent and lyrical and wise and wonderful and sexy. And
those eyes. Windows to her soul.
We all fell in love. So thank you for recommending. And indeed, Daniel's great mentor, teacher, Kim Rubinstein, who's one of the leading female theatre directors in the United States, who I'm so very, very pleased to call one of my dearest, dearest, dearest friends, is coming on to Deep Dialogues in 2 weeks. So that's going to be interesting, because the great Queen comes in.
The Queen.
And reigns supreme. She
truly was the greatest teacher of my whole life. Truly, she's a master.
She's extraordinary. One day we will all be together.
That'd be very nice.
And I don't mean in heaven. I know we'll be together.
I was thinking Hawaii. Hawaii.
We'll be creating something.
Yes, in Hawaii, please. Or Bora Bora, someplace fabulous.
Indeed. I hear you, and from your mouth to God's ears. So this ascendant rise was obviously dependent on two essential factors: your brilliance, and also the wheel of fortune carrying you, destiny carrying you.
Yes.
But from your respect, your perception, any essential ingredients that popped up that carried you on that wave?
Well, of course. Whether it's the luck of the draw or the unluck of the draw, my father's death when I was 9 woke me up to a different layer of reality. Being learning the power of the word faggot for 7 years every day when I was in middle school and high school was another form of poison that I had to carry into the hero's journey, into the forest. And I would also say growing up post 1986 in a culture where my sex life was equated with death for the fundamental first 10 years of my sexual being. AIDS was exploding around the world. And then you go to university and you get Kim as a teacher. And you're encouraged from an incredible arts education to really look inside your own well of blackness, of light, but of you're a subconscious. And if you're lucky, again, Jung, the right teachers, connecting you to the collective unconscious, and at least to readings. That's, the great thing with art is we are the, what is it? Mother is, or history is our great mother. Alice Goodman, the wonderful librettist of Nixon in China. We inherit all these symbols and signs, and so then to be working with those and processing your own inner life, mainly, as Joseph Campbell would say, who's an idol of mine, around the Christianity myth of heaven, hell, God, damnation, good, bad, devil, and being given art, being given words, being given movement, being given image as my outlet. It was the alchemy. Really, I felt like my university demanded of me when I left that all of my art confront the religious, political, and cultural institutions of our time, that it was my duty as an artist to be asking these very difficult questions of human behavior in a political, religious, and cultural context. And of course, as I hope you can already see the black and white in me, like, of course, that's incredible. And it's also made for an extremely painful career at times. As a young, I remember when I first sat with you, you said, I see an egg which is cracked, and it's coming back together. But, those first 10 years of my career, which went very quickly, I was a very young man. I was a very young man inside. I hadn't grown up, which made my art thrilling and playful and so alive. But, it made the relationships off stage. I was quite a force of nature. And that I had to grow up. And so in taking the time to grow up kind of 7 years ago, all those tools, all that deep work, meditating, coming back full force, a sense of prayer, a reconnection to the land, and gardening and watercolors, and being in a new relationship, and feeling more affirmed in what I do value and not ashamed of what I don't. And just this mantra that there's room for all the trees in the forest, which I needed. I needed that permission. In America, I think in the 80s, we were raised to be the kings. We have to get to the top of the mountain. And the top of the mountain is icy and cold, and everyone's trying to throw you off. And you can't breathe very well up there. And so the idea that, like, there's just space for everything. That's when I went back to London and did the Opera House. And, there's so much about the Opera House, which I loved. And finally, that sort of old school establishment institution also comes with its own set of bondage. No, thank you. So that's how I view the kind of the meteor through the sky, and now I just feel like the universe plopped me, in my partner's new house, in his new job, just when I thought I was going to be on the road for a year and a half. Just, suitcases every 2 months I change suitcases. And yeah, as you said, this has just been an incredible time to go, wait a second, there's a whole another layer of attachments, ego, superficial wants that you can let go of and just be even more authentic to what you love in art, which is poetry. That which cannot be said with words. I mean, Shakespeare, there's a lot of words because he's trying to articulate the ineffable, the ephemeral, the divine, And I'm also lucky that I'm middle-aged and have been very well paid and I have a house, and my assistants are struggling. They don't have a job. Everything's been removed.
Mm.
So I sit in my blessing, but with also awareness of how much the industry and the world, again, are in this transition.
Mm.
And it's tempting to just retire
Mm. Mm.
to Kauai and be like, well, I did my thing. But I actually think the hardest work begins now as a citizen of the world.
Yeah, because part of this conversation, as in all of these deep dialogues, is, as the introduction suggests, that what we're doing, I believe, is examining a new hierarchy of values, because the old values are no longer, as you've just enumerated, the old values are in part no longer necessary. And I do want to just uncannily draw a parallel between yourself and Meghan Markle in a moment. I mean, it's very interesting that you went to the same university and relatively at the same time. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, maybe somebody in the audience is actually has been. This is the Great Northwestern in Chicago, or just north of Chicago in Evanston, that Daniel went to, where Meghan was also a student. And of course, Northwestern has this extraordinary premise of being able to educate people who are ready to be iconoclastic, not in any ungracious or disgraceful way, but actually as thought changers, as change makers. And what's interesting is that both of you, because you happen to be the two people that are representative of that seat of learning, meaning yourself and Meghan Markle, have actually are standing in front of the hegemony of patriarchy and saying, was this the best choice?
Yes, and they did not like it.
And that's and of course the same thing happened to me during my end time at Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, where I was literally all sorts of nefarious things were done to me until I finally said, you know what, here's my resignation, and walked out. So the point of the question, although you've attended to it so richly through the richness of your, the tapestry of your inner life, that there was an ascendancy through that period, that I always feel that we are guided by cosmic guardians that Dr. Martin Luther King called the angels, that we're guided to optimize our creativity as much as we can through love and joy. And because you are who you are, because you have the fiber of the radical within you, you're taken into truth-seeking situations where, of course, you're pitched up against what you see on the outside, which is fundamentally what's going on in the inside, but thereby bring about change. So if you were to look particularly at the, just to refer, because you've partly referred to, I just want to formalize it for the listeners, that what Daniel was talking about is that he became the artistic director of a major British establishment called English National Opera, and he was artistic director for 3 years. So he was responsible, therefore, for the artistic policy for 3 years. And of course, by nature of the fact that he was employed by an organization, he was there interfacing with boards, with the hierarchy, and eventually chose to leave. However, I know that you deduced what purpose you needed to deduce from the experience. But if you were to identify one single characteristic that allowed you through that ascendancy and then introduced you to those major European opera houses, what would it be? Just the one major consideration.
It's not what you're expecting me to say, but it's meditation.
Oh, I love you.
That's meditation. It's the only reason.
Everybody.
There's one reason I'm still alive, and it's meditation. And there's one thing that if I don't do, the day does not go well. Meditation.
I love you. You see, so the whole process was this glorious meditation. And then, of course, coming out of the field of meditation into 3D, which clashes often with meditation. But at least we have the meditation. It feels to me, you see, if I may quickly just add to that, I don't feel that we're going to get through the next 10 years if we're not all meditating, if we're not all moving into silence, solitude, and stillness once, twice a day, where we stimulate serotonin and oxytocin in our bodies to give us that prolonged sense of grace that is evidently going to be needed, because The darkness is in our faces. We've been through 4 years of the shadow complex with Mr. Trump. This is just the beginning. And so meditation, everybody. This is extraordinary. You know, today is International Women's Day.
I do, of course I do. Here we are, two men, but you know, we love our ladies. No, I've seen a lot of beautiful posts today and read some beautiful things online and called my mother.
Yes. Oh, that's beautiful. Beautiful. Well done.
Well, she's one of the best ones I know. So, you know.
I feel that, you know, that is this accurate? That I feel your life is in service to an arousal of the divine feminine, which is possibly one of the reasons why you chose to incarnate as a gay man, to stand astride the genders.
Well, I definitely, you know, since the last 7 years, all my work's been about trying to raise up the divine feminine. As the pandemic hit and Me Too and Black Lives Matter has risen up now, and so many more incredible female artists are being put where they need to be put, which is directing. I'm realizing, I just did a piece in Vienna, Melisande, Peleus and Melisande, and it was all about female trauma and all about the lineage of the women in my family, which I feel very connected to. But I did think, it's time that I do Death of a Salesman. It's time that I work with some of the great patriarchal white male masters, and I say that term intentionally, and really examine the shadow of their work. It's something I'm very good at, exploring the shadow in myself. I mean, that's kind of old now. I'm not 20 anymore, but I'm very good at meditation, looking inside. And so I feel very much of the feminine, and I've even thought about they, them, but I don't know. Pronouns don't interest me. I don't care what your pronouns are. I don't want to offend anyone by using the wrong pronoun, but I've thought about that. And I just know so much of my energy is, you know, in another life, I know in this life, you know, there's like a drag queen shaman in the dance, in the sequins, in the lipstick, in the eyeshadow, in the chants, in the desire to heal. I've always been, you know, I think I said to you when I was, 23, like, I keep saying a monastery, and you were like, that's going to be the pull of your whole life. Do I go to the monastery or like flash my ego on a giant stage? And it is. And my second level of meditation, I started with TM in London. I did that, I paid for that, and I did that. And I did it quite faithfully for about 3 years. Then it trickled off as the drugs and sex and alcohol trickled up. And they do go hand in hand very well. It doesn't work well together, but they do go hand in hand. And then 7 years ago, I found Zen Buddhist meditation and a teacher, 2 teachers, and that set in at the right moment to really create the springboard where the feminine, I could actively articulate the things about the divine feminine and actually put them in my work. But, you know, in London in particular, like when you try to talk with, you know, kind of middle class or you know, anyone, any white male, any heterosexual white male about the divine feminine or the patriarch or toxic masculinity or what gentle man means, or Harvey Weinstein and what these women are talking about with Hollywood films where all women are somehow a reflection of a man in the center, and systemic masculinity and systemic racism. We all know it's sometimes like talking to very absorbent walls and curtains that singers hate. And when I actually tried to put the word feminine, the rise of the feminine, which was my second, you know, after looking at the toxic patterns and toxic tectonic plates that are shifting around us, I think the tectonic plates are very important right now. I was really trying to put the feminine directly out there, working towards the androgy, towards the new concept of I, which is all of us in the I, the Buddhism of one, that Americans somehow in West Palm Beach standing in front of a judge being like, I'm not wearing a mask, me, my, I, the entire death of the social contract in America right now, the death of the social contract, this country which led the world on a new social contract of transport, of health.
the death needs to take place, and
It
then
does need to take place, but people are trying to preserve. I mean, this is also, my stepfather's an embalmer. This is the land of embalming fluid. People are clinging to their air conditioning and strip malls and really bad corporate 4-star food and Jeep Cherokees.
But there's inspiration coming, because when we start getting ready, as we were saying earlier, there is creative flow, because suddenly, we need to allow the economy to flow post COVID, which, obviously we're moving towards. We still will have to deal with reparation, of course, and organizing ourselves vis-a-vis vaccination and blah 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 blah. But I see the prophecy that you've just set I see this production of The Death of Salesman, which is an extraordinary play, for those of you who are unfamiliar, by Arthur Miller. In a sentence, what's your vision of why the death of the salesman?
Why that play now? Oh, in one sentence. Well, I think what I love the most about it is that the subtitle, which no one ever talks about, is Private Conversations and a Requiem. And thus laying Adam and Willie to rest. And when we lay our forefathers to rest, we inherit all of the incredible patterning and modeling that they left us. And we have the choice to stop repeating patterns of behavior which they left us, which are selfish or toxic or greedy. And that analysis and reflection has to happen.
Yeah. So the narcissism of the American dream is literally buried, and then a new form comes forth. So I began to get very imaginative when you mentioned maybe it will be some drag thing extravaganza. And of course, the first person that I saw was RuPaul stepping forward and being your key star, because Ru brings a grace, an elegance, an intelligence, and God, the divine, into his extraordinary androgynous creation, because when he's in drag, he looks sometimes more like a woman than a woman. I mean, forgive me, ladies. As you know, I'm in complete celebration of all femininity. But in terms of the way that the androgynous comes in, and maybe androgyny is actually the element that is going to speak the loudest as a clarion call, because it's worked so hard for its own spiritual freedom to be glorified in its celebration.
Yeah.
That's one of the ways that we see the American dream being put to sleep, and then we see it re-emerging in the form of this wonderful creation of male-female being. Fascinating. And also female drag kings.
Oh yeah,
that would be so exciting. Anyway, I know that you'll find a way of, because the richness of what you've just described in terms of the way that you identify all of the varying aspects in those moments that you just shared with us are multifarious and very diverse, but absolutely crucial, that you'll bring them into a wonderful piece, that you'll be able to speak to us all to clarify your vision, which is full of hope and full of resurrection.
Definitely full of resurrection.
I'm just checking my questions, because I wrote.
I can keep talking away, but I like the questions.
What's interesting is that we've just answered so many of the questions that I asked, because one of my essential questions was that when this is all over, what production do you want to align with, which is, I was just saying. And I had in my mind, it must be Arthur Miller, it must be Death of the Salesman or something. So I was obviously precognitive of what you were actually going to say.
I've created a few things in lockdown. So the first one that I did last May in Wildfire was Mendelssohn's Elijah Elias, which I'm doing in 2024. And it was one of the first times I wasn't hired. Someone had mentioned it to me and I listened to it, and I just gave birth to it in like 4 weeks with my 2 assistants every day on the phone, just an entire new vision for Elijah pressing reset on human evolution. And so I'll do that in 24, and that was all from Nietzsche's Antichrist, which has been big influence for me over the pandemic, and the absurdity and nihilism of the construct of reality that we're in, and how it's failing, it's not working, we need new systems. So that one, and then this laying Adam to rest is a big one right now. Death of a Salesman is big, but the number one piece that I'm always wrestling with, which I feel like is my entire life goal, like, you know, when I'm 60 or something, I'll do it and then move to Kauai. I really want to move to Kauai, can you tell? This is the myth of Prometheus, to finish the trilogy. Very important to me. So really working with the original Prometheus Bound, and working with Shelley's Prometheus Unbound, and then my trilogy to finish it is Prometheus Transfigures.
Yeah.
And that's my opus. That's the thing that I have to live to write.
This is now written. You do realize it's written in the annals, in the ether.
Good.
And in 10, 15 years' time, I shall remind you. This is what you're going to do. By that time, I will be in my 80s, so that'll be exciting. You know, I'm nearly 70.
Really? I don't know.
Astonishing. Anyway, if you had, bearing in mind the rich arc that you're just describing, and how to influence not just the culture of art or the art of culture, but if you had the opportunity to have a meeting tomorrow or next week in the Oval Office with Mr. Biden and wonderful Kamala Harris, and they were asking for your interpretation of what they need to embrace in relation to the next major endowment within the arts, what would you suggest to them?
A national arts education program that's mandatory for preschool through 12th grade. And I'd be happy to give my entire life to that and quit directing ever again, and just lead on fundraising, but on a mandatory 45 minutes a day. Every single student, K through 12, every high school gets an art class, because lateral thinking and creativity are the number one item that one can sell, and the only solution that will solve the broken world that needs to be mended. Mending, it's a very important verb right now, isn't it?
Yeah.
So arts education, I would give it all to K through 12. You know, when we talk about even diversity, there's so many things that institutions must do and can do so easily in terms of changing the balance of 51% and representation from the bottom to the top of boards to the person who's sweeping the floor. But the number one thing we can do in all cultures right now is make sure that the pipeline of young individuals who understand that the arts are a viable, wonderful, essential, healthy profession in which they can earn a full-time living is a very viable education and job to get. So more people going to university or trade schools to become professional artists. And for that, we need many more exposure to the arts. And that can be, you know, computer animation, that can be screenwriting, that can be playing the flute, that can be composing Hollywood scores, operas, musicals, TV dingles, Netflix wingles, the arts.
Yeah, and living through the wonder of poetry.
Absolutely. I mean, what do we remember from the inauguration? The poet.
That was extraordinary. I haven't got this prepared, but I just want to very quickly refer to something which I know will dazzle you. And it's possibly something that you've heard before. Interestingly, I picked up at Chicago Shakespeare some time ago, and it's a quote by John F. Kennedy to support what we're talking about, HIJ. I'm just going into a file on my computer. It's ravishing, which is why I'm indulging us. When power leads man towards arrogance, poetry reminds him of his limitations. When power narrows the areas of man's concern, poetry reminds him of the richness and diversity of his existence. When power corrupts, poetry cleanses, for art establishes the basic truths which must serve as the touchstones of our judgment. 1963. I'll send it to you later. You see, in Daniel's wonderful words, you've just said that.
That is
Isn't
the last 7 years of my life. Wow, that's a
that
beautiful thought.
interesting? You know, a month after he said that, he was shot.
Well,
His life was exterminated. It was very interesting because at that time it was really the dying pangs of the metaphoric consciousness that had been created in the vibration of the United States by the wonder of Dr. Martin Luther King,
uh,
the amazing spiritual intelligence of Malcolm X, followed through by JFK, although we know he was perfectly imperfect and did all sorts of unusual things to his women. And then the beautiful Robert Kennedy, that they were actually constantly quoting poetry, constantly quoting the great masters. And then suddenly that voice, which was the voice of the heart, went quiet. And I believe that now it's returning, do you see? And that Marianne was very instrumental within this during the engagement in the presidential electoral process. She would never want me to say race because it wasn't a race. She was co-creating and still is, of course. So it becomes this very, very unique, hopeful, resurrecting promise, which is actually the nectar of the divine feminine, isn't it?
absolutely.
So hopefully that's also giving you a little bit of, oh, wow, that's exciting.
That was very, very nourishing. Thank you. Really.
Because after all, you know, digging to lay Adam to rest is actually, as we both know, quite painful. You know, we have to dig, 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 dig.
Yes.
What do you feel will be the creative effect that it will emerge from the substance of COVID? I mean, we in part we've already talked about it, I know, but I'm just thinking particularly about the nature of the way that COVID has come as a phenomenon. And I find it very interesting that, like HIV, its resolution is within our lungs and it cripples our lungs. Just as HIV, as we know, or full-blown AIDS, that we died of pneumonia.
Yeah.
And so symbolically, what do you feel that that's all about? What can we learn from it?
Well, I think that the lungs are, of course, grief, aren't they? And it's interesting that the earth has been kind of so on fire that the body became on fire and we kind of drown in our own lungs, in our own grief. One of the things that when I was really creating the paradigm for what energies I wanted at English National Opera was the gross revelation of the unprocessed grief from World War I and World War II that all of Europe still hold. Why is it American don't hold that? I hold other massive issues, don't I? Such as slavery. But it felt so important to work with that unprocessed grief, which we see in Brexit in particular, immediately, with the vaccine, instantly, speaking with my European houses, the way in which England is selfishly withholding, the unprocessed grief. So I think COVID was this incredible moment to go inside and, whether we like it or not, process. And sadly for some nations now, especially my own, that's pills and bad food and Netflix, which has good things about it, but an addiction towards the escape tube. And what I hope that COVID will have done, because it's so mythical, isn't it, the plague, I hope on as deep level as we start to reconvene in public spaces, which is why it was so important, the lockdown. And it's sad about America, because Americans, more than any country, need a lockdown. So that when we come out, we value again just sitting at the table with another person. And that all the gadgets and gizmos and all the layers of rapid fire social media distraction that we have become addicted to, they don't matter as much. That would be the true blessing of COVID, that we really reconnect with just feeling the person's vibration with us, and just conversation and banter and laughter and dinner party chatter and tenderness and little touches and hugs hello and hugs goodbye. Reconnection, a redefinition of human intimacy, which is so an endangered species. Which is why I think we love theater too. People are intimate on stage, even if they have to have intimacy directors. We're achieving it. No one's modeling it. How many parents model intimacy for their children, even these days?
Well, in preparation for our meeting, which really started, I suppose, when you were able to agree, about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and then your introduction to my introduction through you to Corinne, it reconnected me with the great breath of the song or the aria, and how you've been steeped in through different recitative, through different melodies. You've just, I guess that the war period was very much to do with, because you did War Requiem, didn't you? And
Yeah.
Angels in America. So, there's great influences. However, the point that I wanted to make was that by the sheer might of your artistic will, there you are, drawing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, your audience, including your performers, into the great breath of these works. And that through the breath, it's interesting, somebody's just written in the chat box, I don't quite see RuPaul playing Willie. And that's not quite what we were intending.
That's not my concept, but
it's an interesting
wild things in there.
We talk about Death of a Salesman as one project, and then a drag extravaganza as another one.
I do have a project for RuPaul. I do. I promise.
You what? Sorry?
I do have a project for RuPaul. I just have to get it to them.
Yeah. Well, from your mouth to God's ears, great magic and miracles are taking place. You're destined for greatness. You're destined for greatness. However, breathing life into, it reminds me of that extraordinary statement in Genesis, and God breathed into the nostrils of man, and man became a living soul. And it feels to me, that's just talking about man, but actually he was talking about man generically, and it was actually man, woman, of course. But you breathe life into, you resurrect life, do you see, through the breath of the way that you steer great performers through the dynamics of their song or the dynamics of their text, even though they're borrowed words made credible. That's the joy that you did. Daniel and I worked on a production he directed, and I helped him in the voice aspect, which is quite interesting, wasn't it? On a production of Bent, which maybe some of you know, which was about the plight of homosexuality in the concentration camps that Hitler created, which Daniel staged in the West End, which was met very successfully, wasn't it? I'm just reminding of the way that you conjured the actors to always be within the pulse of the line, within the breath of the feeling and the thought.
Well, go ahead.
So you're doing something powerfully to resurrect, I mean.
Trying, especially just with being a good person, which hopefully the work follows from that. So, if I can keep myself even keeled and keep myself aware of what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, really being present to ironies and energies and absurdities and cruelties, sadly, if I can stay aware of the things I notice in the world and society and write those questions down and keep trying to ask them publicly with a sense of humor, but also as a sense of, I guess I always depend on imagery to make sure it snaps my audience awake, that theater has to be a place of active thought. I'm not a huge personal fan of entertainment for entertainment's sake.
Yes, and which is really why I wanted to describe you as a poetic director, because although you embrace the classics and all of their extraordinary intelligence, and I would probably suggest, maybe this is outrageous on me, that you actually bow at the altar of the classicism. But what's so wonderful is that you reinvent classicism through your poetic,
thank you,
directorial, and I'm embracing many thoughts here. And I know several people that are listening have heard me say this before, but to enrapture you, when I saw the might of the Trump regime coming to flow in 2016, I immediately reach out for poetry, to something that explains the madness of what's going on. And I was led through intuition, through spirit, I was led to the 1930s, prior to the ascendancy of the Third Reich.
Wotan.
actually to Christopher Fry. And I wanted to share this with you because I feel also it's a message of hope, where he wrote, it's in a poem, I'll send the poem to you, it's called The Sleep of Prisoners.
Please do.
And there's a small section that says, thank God our time is now, when wrong comes up at every turn, never to leave us till we take the longest stride of soul we humans ever took. It takes thousands of years to wake, but will you wake for pity's sake? And, it's a point of inspiration. I feel that that's what's actually happening. There is a death of the patriarchy. We're beginning to realize that the patriarchy was based on great shadow complex because it was always pushed down. It was never overt. There's that wonderful line in Henry IV, I speak of peace, whilst covert enmity wounds the world. And
man way, doesn't he?
Your work speaks of peace.
It does. And luckily I do now too, in my behavior in life, you know? And that scares people almost more when we as individuals can be so in our center, and yet our work and our creations can be so completely reflective of the dangerous lightning rods at work in the universe.
Yeah.
People really don't like that. People want to remain safe and have just a little bit of cayenne pepper on their chicken. No, 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 no. We're doing wasabi tonight, people.
Well, I did describe you as a meteor scoring through the heavens.
Yeah.
With a very long comet tail. So you light up the heavens, you see.
I'm a bit buoyant.
So by that statement, it almost sounds as though the enfant terrible is just the enfant is moving into the enfant paradis. There's moving away from being so terrible and iconoclastic into, no, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to create paradise for you.
I think what I actually finally feel free to do now, and really this is the great thing about leaving E&O, is I finally feel free to only work where they truly want it and they support it. You know, these last few shows in Vienna, in Taiwan, in Basel, these upcoming shows in Geneva and Hanover, and they really, there's a welcome mat. And as I get sharper and really start to come into, you know, the prime of my 40s, I'm able to say no a lot. And that's not the case for the first 15 years. You're so desperate to make it and then trying to earn a living and then, you know, think you need this much, you know. And so I hope there is a final real invitation into more self and more authentic, and really, you know, this last piece I did at the Burg Theater in Vienna this autumn, Melisson, really felt like the most true thing I've ever done in my entire life to me. Not what people wanted me to do, not what I thought I needed to do, not what I think people want me to do or don't want me to do, but what she needed to be said, you know, and to just be of service to that. So, and if I could get down to just doing 1 or 2 of those a year, so they can be so authentic and you can just live them and walk them and then enjoy bread and jam and the trees and the seasons. You know, it's like I'm almost back on the farm where I grew up. Really, what matters? You know, what matters? Short 100 years we might get.
Well, that's extraordinary and very beautiful. I hope people are hearing you, that you're coming home. But of course, it's a home that is not shot full of disturbance because of being around Peg in a square hole. So as you come home to the earth, because, you know, for those of you who don't know, Daniel was brought up on a farm in Ohio.
Yeah.
What was the farm responsible for? Was it arable?
Sheep.
Sheep. Interesting.
Big vegetable garden. Oh yeah,
it's an allegory, isn't it? You know?
Absolutely.
I follow the sheep.
Sheep. And River Styx Road. I was born and raised on River Styx Road. STYX.
Wow. Isn't that? Oh, really?
STYX. It was That's it. And my stepfather was an embalmer, like Charon, who ushered the dead across the river.
Oh my God, Daniel, that is the most. I suddenly saw a whole Netflix series.
I hope so. That's my goal. Netflix, come on! I want to play in TV land.
Do you have a writer?
No, I write.
You write.
But you can pair me with a writer if you have one.
Well, I just saw it all.
Well, that's a life goal. River Styx Road.
That is extraordinary. What an allegory. It was right under your nose. And I mean, I know you have, this is not the first time you thought about it, but it's just, as you were saying, coming back to the inner child, which I feel is, in the purity and the innocence of the inner child, not coming back to the inner child who is excessively damaged or violated,
No.
even though that is present in all of us,
Of
but
course.
really back, which is, I feel, one of the greatest gifts that the Divine Mother has brought us to in the substance of COVID, do you see? It's, I'm based in London, as you know, and we're in thorough lockdown here still, and it's very cold. But during the global pause, meaning April, May, June, I've never experienced London in the weather that it had.
I heard that.
Just extraordinary. These blue skies that I would imagine you're experiencing today, that northeastern seaboard, blue skies, high pressure with sun shining, but the chill of early spring. It was just extraordinary. So it was reminding me of this deep tranquility of moving into listening to the Divine Mother. And the first thing she said to me was, I want to see your child. And so, of course, immediately, I'm very easy with that. Not my offspring, but my inner child. I don't have an offspring, but my inner child came out to play. And the one thing she wanted to do was to extol the virtue of my innocence. So I hope also that in coming home to the child and by going to the earth, that you also, because you said that you were getting your hands in the soil and sowing your seeds for your vegetables in your garden there. Rhode Island. It's Rhode Island, isn't it?
I'm in Rhode Island right now, Providence, yeah.
Yeah, Providence, that's right. Wow, I love it. I love Providence. I'll have to come.
It's a very special little place.
I'll have to come and visit you in Paul. So going back to the soil, how fantastic. And then seeing from a distance the River Styx as an allegory rather than as a pestilential problem.
Absolutely. I mean, that River Styx and that tightrope of the edge of death was the greatest lesson of she's always there. But it's an invitation to live. That took years to understand. And even in the pandemic last July, with one of my guides, I really had the biggest revelation. I was really able to finally understand depression and just realize that all I had to do was let the creative energy out every day. And the minute I mean, I've been told that before, but I was ready to hear. But the minute I put it into practice last July, any of the potential depression of the loss, I was like, oh, I can honor it this way. And it's just the writing again has been massive for that. Of you can't create or destroy the energy, but you can transform it. Prometheus transforms.
Yeah,
you have to transform it.
Yeah. The Nietzsche said the only vindication of suffering is great art.
Oh yes, I mean, birth of tragedy, absolutely. And there is something as we as artists and our unbelievable empathetic skills, which of course everyone doesn't have, and with the way that the modeling of social behavior has happened for the past probably 50 years, more and more children have an issue with empathy. But it's the greatest gift I guess we can share and offer people in the dark, in those dark safe spaces with red velvet seeds. Yeah.
Daniel, this has been such an extraordinary encounter. Thank you so much for coming on Dialogues. I feel that you in your own genius has sort of brought forward such extraordinary elements. Any questions from anybody? Finally, lots and lots and lots of beautiful comments, but Anyway, so people are agreeing like mad. Bless you. Thank you so much. Anyway, Daniel, thank you so much. And everybody, as usual, for tuning in. This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bottom of my heart. Please, would you stay where you are, Daniel, while we go into close down? And then I just want to say, you know, a few private things. Everybody, namaste, namaste, namaste. See you next week, where the wonderful Emmanuel Daga comes back on. My sweet, sweet, sweet brother, who's an extraordinary healer based in Santa Barbara, who is originally Lebanese and escaped from Lebanese during the war-torn periods, and he's become this extraordinary, sweet, lovely, innocent being. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan.